And of course, the interesting thing was that Congressman Paul has been actually elected to office 11 times, and Mr. Trump, I believe, has not been elected to any office. And so I think I did say it was a preposterous statement for him to say that, kind of dismissing Dr. Paul out of hand, who has a very large national organization really in place, should he choose to use it. He has national name recognition. And more importantly, he really has a serious, sound economic policy, foreign policy, monetary policy, a program to defend civil liberties that's well articulated and very popular, not only among Republicans and Libertarians, Independents, but many Democrats as well. He has a very broad reach. And so while Mr. Trump is now a kind of a television star and a real estate mogul and a wonderful American who has a lot of vitality for the free market, and I have a lot of respect for him, I did make the comment that this is politics, and he is in many ways really a neophyte at that. Just in terms of he has not run for office to my knowledge and hasn't won. So I think Dr. Paul, were he to run, I think would mount a serious challenge to Barack Obama, given that his policies are really the antithesis of Mr. Obama's policies of more government, more intervention, Dr. Paul being more freedom, less intervention, both nationally and internationally.
And of course, we had this Rasmussen poll this week, which shows that Ron Paul has a better chance of beating Obama than indeed Sarah Palin, who of course is not there at CPAC, but she's going to be one of the big establishment Republican candidates who they're going to heavily push in the coming months. And this poll showed that Ron Paul was 2 points ahead of her in terms of the ability to defeat Obama. Now, what's interesting is we had this recent 15-point bounce that Obama enjoyed after the Tucson shootings. Before that, and of course that bounce is certain to subside, before that we had a poll, another Rasmussen poll in April of last year that said that if Ron Paul and Obama went head-to-head, that it would basically be a dead heat. I mean, Obama only edged that poll by 1%, and that's before, of course, the mobilization of the grassroots Ron Paul movement that you just mentioned. So, I mean, both of those polls completely contradict Trump's claim that he's got, quote, zero chance, surely, don't they, Joe?
Well, it really does, and it's a couple of serious polls showing really this statistical dead heat. And again, I think that's because Dr. Paul has a legitimate foreign policy, domestic policy, and that it is appealing not only to Republicans but also many Democrats, Independents, Libertarians, and it's well articulated and it's thoughtful. And it actually, I think Americans this next cycle are really going to be looking for solutions. And a Sarah Palin is certainly a charismatic figure, clearly a polarizing figure. Mr. Obama has been a polarizing figure. I think Dr. Paul, with his emphasis on the Constitution, that being that document that really welcomes everyone and addresses their concerns, a broad spectrum of people can look at and live within the Constitution and be able to pursue their life, liberty, and happiness. I think there's a broad-based appeal, and his candidacy, if he were to run, would be serious and a serious challenge. So, again, Mr. Trump is a charismatic and a delightful American, and charming and very successful in many ways. But I think to dismiss a serious candidate out of hand, I thought was somewhat whimsical on his part.
And you mentioned the fact that we've got this whole raft of polarizing candidates, certainly many of which are there at CPAC at the moment. Isn't it the case that, if Republicans just elect a George Bush 2.0, someone like Mitt Romney or Newt Gingrich, another neocon, that will completely eliminate the chances of securing these swing votes? We know that there are millions of dissatisfied independents and Democrats who have completely lost faith in, Obama's hope and change, and that those votes are on the table. And in fact, won't Ron Paul be in the perfect position to capture that demographic, whereas the more establishment candidates won't?
Well, and this is something that America is really kind of waking up to with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, this kind of swing from polar opposite to polar opposite. You have one party winning, and of course they want to benefit their special interest group. The other party wins, they want to benefit their special interest group supporters. But really, the two parties really have one thing in common. They really want to interfere and intervene in your life, certainly domestically and internationally. They want to be involved in your money. They want to be involved in your freedom, your civil liberties. And now we even have the moxie to say that we want to be involved in making decisions for our other sovereign nations around the world. And someone like a Dr. Paul, someone with that more libertarian, more free market, more constitutional, traditional American-based worldview is really more of what you'd call a non-interventionist, a person that says we look at our citizens, we treat them with respect as adults, they make their choices, they take the responsibility for their choices, and good heavens, overseas, these are sovereign people and sovereign nations. Really, it's kind of none of our business to get involved with them dictating what they should do. And I think, and hopefully, that's what we'll do, is we'll, if you will, kind of transcend this seesawing back and forth between interventionists on the right versus interventionists on the left, and going back and forth, and saying if we're really going to solve problems such as our debt, such as these foreign wars and our civil liberties, then we're really going to have to look to people that are principled in traditional American values of free markets, a true free market, and true constitutional, reestablishing our constitutional republic and making sure that's vibrant and vital. And so that's why a Dr. Paul type candidate would be so helpful to this country, whereas many of these other candidates, Democrat or Republican, would be kind of a continuation of this whipsawing kind of a polarity. And to this point of civil liberties, and this is really where our group, Liberty Guard, really comes in, and the work we've been doing with the TSA, and then I've had the pleasure of talking to Alex and his audience about this vital issue of the TSA and how they have, as part and parcel of this culture of intervention, feel that they can, of course, not only take electronic images of us trying to get into airports that end up essentially denuding us and taking nude photographs of us, but then this much more draconian measure of these full body searches, and that's something that Liberty Guard has been very active in combating, and that's something we were wanting to visit with you today on.
Yeah, because of course Liberty Guard was one of the groups at the forefront of the backlash against the TSA, which really kicked into high gear at the back end of last year. Now, you had this Freedom of Information Act request, and of course that was dealing with a demand for the TSA to turn over all information on this blatantly obvious stand down that occurred over the Thanksgiving period, when reports were pouring in from across the country of naked body scanners being turned off and these invasive pat-downs being temporarily mothballed in what we wrote at the time basically was a political stunt to derail the momentum of this National Opt-out Day protest, which was occurring at exactly the same time. Now, Joe, first the TSA tried to ignore you. They tried to buy some time with this Freedom of Information Act request. Now I understand you've got to the stage where you're preparing the lawsuit. Can you give us an update on that situation and where it's heading at the moment?
Well, thank you. And yes, that's exactly right. When I last spoke with Alex, we were talking, and we had, of course, filed the Freedom of Information Act, and we were fully expecting that we would not get a response. And I think I was even on the air the day that the TSA needed to respond, and much to our amazement, quite literally at the last moments before it was due, we were notified that they were responding. And essentially, that was really a tactical maneuver on their part to prohibit us from actually being able to file the federal lawsuit that we were prepared to file. It forced us to go into an administrative remedy in which we and the TSA begin a process of discussions to try to understand and get to the bottom of this. But the problem is, of course, that could take a month or 2 or 6. They could certainly drag it out. One could understand why they would want to drag it out, because in their response to us, they said, and really our response, Paul, we wanted to know specifics, and we wanted to say, did you discuss Alex Jones? Did you discuss Prison Planet? Did you discuss Bob Barr and Liberty Guard? Did you discuss Matt Drudge? And if you did, we want to know about it. And did you have discussions that might indicate that you were going to stand down on the day or two, the Thanksgiving day or two before? These are the most heavily traveled days. And the days in where the TSA, what they have told us is that those would be the days you'd want to have lots of extra scans. You'd want to really have those machines at top form, because they have told us that our well-being, our safety in the skies is contingent upon those machines and contingent upon those searches. We had called for the opt-out alliance that day of opting out. People saying, I don't want the scan, I want the pat down, and really to kind of share with really all Americans the intrusive nature of this, and to bring it to their attention through the media. And when they called it off, and they shut down the machines, and they did not do the pat downs on the very day that they should be doing the most of them to protect Americans, we couldn't help but think, did they do that for a political reason? Did they realize that the media spotlight and the awareness of the American people were going to really be on them and what they were doing? And I think, this is one of these procedures, Paul, where, civil liberties has an abstract nature to it. We think about it, freedom of speech, it's so ubiquitous in this country that we take it for granted. But when we see, a grandmother or a nun or a child being essentially groped and fondled and all but strip searched essentially, and we see the demeaning component of it, it's shocking to us, and it's kind of a visual symbol of the degeneration of the vitality of the protection of our civil liberties, particularly when a real question arises based upon some studies is how effective this really is in protecting American safety in the skies. So there's a real serious question of whether they did that. We filed the FOIA to force their hand. They get back to us and say, we've got 9 pages that really address the very issues you're raising. And oh, by the way, and this is fascinating, how bureaucracies work. When you said, do we have information talking about Alex Jones and Prison Planet and Bob Barr and Liberty Guard and Matt Drudge on these 4, 5, 8 days, we didn't think you were being specific enough, so we wouldn't even do that search. Now, I guess I would say when you use a proper noun in someone's name and you give them a 4, 5, or 8 or 10 day range, gee whiz, any of us could figure out how to do that. So I think they've said we got 9 pages on the one topic. We of course have to know that on these other topics they have information. They're not disclosing it, and we got back to them in a very vigorous way, and are demanding to get to the bottom of it. And so we filed kind of a second rebuttal of that FOIA to really drill down and make sure that we're getting to the bottom of it. So that's really the update, Paul, on the first FOIA.
And that's just amazing, the fact that they tacitly admit that they were talking about Alex Jones and Prison Planet with these 9 pages relating to your Freedom of Information Act request. We'll be back after the break with Joe C. Hewson of Liberty Guard.